They put handcuffs on a Marine sniper who earned the Bronze Star in front of his neighbors. No warning, no respect, just humiliation. But what happened next shocked the entire courtroom when a 4-star general walked in, stopped everything, and did the unthinkable. This is the true story the media didn't want you to see, and it all started with revenge. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the latest stories. It started like a scene straight out of a courtroom drama, the kind you see in Hollywood movies. But for Sergeant Marcus Jennings, this wasn't a script, and he wasn't an actor. This was his life, a life that had been defined by discipline, courage, and sacrifice. A life that was now being shattered, not on the battlefield, but in a quiet courtroom in a small American town. Jennings stood tall, but not in the way a Marine should. Not in his uniform, not with medals pinned to his chest or the American flag proudly behind him. No, this time he stood in handcuffs, wrists locked in front of him, escorted by officers who didn't salute him or acknowledge his service. He was led like a suspect, not a soldier. All around him, people stared, whispered, and watched. Some saw just another man in trouble with the law. Few knew the truth. Fewer still cared. But let's rewind for a moment. Sergeant Marcus Jennings wasn't just a soldier. He was elite. A U.S. Marine sniper with unmatched precision. The kind of man who had the calm and skill to steady his rifle under fire, take the shot, and save lives. He had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, each more brutal than the last. He wasn't just out there carrying a gun. He was carrying the weight of his brothers in arms. He was the guardian watching from afar, keeping American troops safe, one calculated shot at a time. He didn't come from privilege. He grew up in the inner city, where opportunities were few and survival was the priority. But he found his calling in the military: discipline, honor, a sense of purpose. That uniform became his identity, his pride, and his protection. So imagine his shock when, one sunny morning, just weeks after returning from his final deployment, police cruisers pulled up in front of his house. He wasn't in uniform. He was just getting ready to take his little brother to school. But before he could open the car door, 3 officers approached, hands on their weapons, voices raised. "Sergeant Marcus Jennings?" one of them barked. He nodded, confused. "Turn." Around. "Hands behind your back. You're under arrest." At first he thought it was a mistake. Maybe a mix-up. Maybe someone with the same name. But within seconds, the cold steel of the handcuffs snapped onto his wrists, and he was pushed into the back of a squad car, in full view of his neighbors, his younger brother, and the community that once praised him as a local hero. The charge: assaulting a fellow officer. Jennings was stunned. He hadn't touched anyone, hadn't even left his neighborhood in the past week. He didn't resist. He didn't argue. Marines are trained to stay composed under pressure, and that's what he did, even as his entire life began to unravel. What made it worse was that the story spread like wildfire. Local news ran his mugshot. Online comments exploded. Some called him a disgrace. Others questioned his mental health. "PTSD," one post read. "These soldiers come back and lose it. They didn't know him. They didn't know the truth." But the world was already judging. As the days passed, Jennings sat in a holding cell, waiting for answers, replaying the arrest over and over in his mind. He thought about his tours, the lives he'd saved, the nights spent on rooftops in the Middle East, his eye pressed to a scope while gunfire lit up the night sky. He remembered his team, the ones who never came home, and now he was being accused, not by enemies but by the very country he fought for. The courtroom date came fast. Jennings walked into that room with his head high, even with cuffs digging into his wrists. But what he felt most wasn't anger. It was betrayal. All he wanted was a chance to clear his name. But sitting across the room was the man who had accused him, another former Marine, a man with his own secrets, and someone who Jennings had once reported for misconduct during a classified mission overseas. The courtroom was heavy with tension. Friends, family, former Marines who served with Jennings sat behind him. His lawyer whispered strategy. The judge entered. Proceedings began. And still, those cuffs remained on his wrists. How had it come to this? A sniper trusted with the lives of dozens, treated like a criminal. A man who had stared death in the face, now struggling to defend his honor on home soil. It wasn't just about the charge. It was about what it meant, the disrespect, the injustice, the system that didn't stop to ask questions, just moved forward, ready to condemn. But what nobody knew, not even Jennings, was that someone had been watching. Someone powerful. Someone who had served with him. A man who had risen to the top of the military hierarchy and had seen the same corruption brewing beneath the surface, and that man was about to walk into the courtroom. But that part of the story comes next. Because, just when things seemed hopeless, the courtroom doors swung open, and everything changed. The air was heavy, too heavy for a courtroom that size. The kind of silence that makes your heart thump louder than normal. The kind that makes every breath feel like a mistake. Trial day had arrived. For Sergeant Marcus Jennings, it wasn't just another court appearance. This was the day everything could change. For better or for worse. The courtroom was packed. Not just with lawyers, journalists, and legal staff. No. This case had drawn the attention of the entire town, and beyond. Reporters lined the back wall, camera crews adjusted their tripods, microphones glinted under the harsh overhead lights. They were all waiting for the show to start. And Sergeant Jennings, he was the main event. When the doors opened and he was brought in, you could feel the shift. Conversations stopped, phones were lowered. Everyone watched as the man who had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan, a Bronze Star recipient, a Marine sniper with unmatched precision, walked in wearing prison green, not his uniform. His hands were cuffed. His face was calm, but you could see the tension in his jaw. He wasn't broken, not even close, but the weight of betrayal hung over him like a storm cloud. No salute greeted him, no flags waved, no honor in sight. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't search the room for familiar faces. He just kept his eyes forward, head high, spine straight, the way a Marine is trained to carry himself, even when the world turns its back. As he took his seat at the defense table, his attorney leaned over and whispered something. Jennings gave a single nod. The judge's seat was still empty, and murmurs rippled across the room as people tried to guess what would happen next. But no one, absolutely no one, could have predicted what came next. Just as the bailiff called, "Out, all rise," and footsteps echoed down the hall leading to the judge's entrance, another sound broke through. The rear courtroom doors creaked open. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't quiet. And it wasn't part of the schedule. Every head turned, and there, stepping through the threshold with deliberate pace and undeniable presence, was a man who instantly commanded the attention of everyone in the room. He wore the full dress uniform of a United States military officer, blue and gold, polished and proud. Medals glinted on his chest, ribbons stretched across his heart. A deep scar sliced down the side of his temple, a permanent reminder of wars long past. And on each shoulder, the unmistakable symbol of military power, 4 gleaming stars. It was General Thomas Bradford, a legend. A leader, a man whose name echoed through Marine bases around the world. He wasn't just respected, he was revered. And now he was walking into a civilian courtroom in full regalia, his expression unreadable. The judge froze halfway to her. Seat. Attorneys paused mid-sentence, reporters lowered their cameras, unsure whether they were even allowed to film this, and Sergeant Jennings finally looked up. His eyes locked onto the general's, and the general's eyes didn't waver. Bradford didn't break stride. He walked with purpose, each step steady, each movement calculated. He didn't look at the cameras. He didn't glance at the judge. His full attention was on one man, the one in handcuffs. As he neared the front of the room, an audible gasp escaped from the back row. People stood, not because they were told to, but because something deep in their instincts told them to rise. Some kind of silent reverence took over. Even the judge, still standing behind her bench, lowered her hands to the desk, unsure whether to speak or wait. Bradford stopped right in front of Jennings. He stood tall, shoulders square, chin up, and then, in front of the entire courtroom, under the fluorescent lights and the watching eyes of the nation, General Thomas Bradford raised his hand and saluted. Gasps filled the air. One reporter dropped her pen. The courtroom froze in time. This wasn't just protocol. This wasn't just a gesture. This was a message. One that didn't need words. Because everyone knew. A 4-star general doesn't salute someone in custody. He doesn't salute someone accused of a crime. He doesn't salute just anyone. He salutes a soldier. He salutes a hero. He salutes one of his own. For a moment, Jennings didn't move. But then, slowly, with his cuffed hands shaking slightly, he stood. And though he couldn't return the salute fully, he looked the general in the eye, lifted his chin just a fraction, and nodded. It was quiet, subtle, and packed with meaning. The general held the salute for a full 5 seconds. Then he lowered his hand, turned to the judge, and finally spoke. His voice was like gravel and thunder. Your Honor, before this proceeding continues, I request to speak. You could hear the judge swallow hard. General Bradford, she said, trying to compose herself. This is highly... But he cut her off, not rudely, but with the authority of a man who'd given orders in war zones. More dangerous than any courtroom. I'm not here to interfere, he said calmly. I'm here to apologize, on behalf of a military system and a country that allowed this to happen. Murmurs erupted. The judge motioned for silence. But the message was already clear. This trial was no longer just a case. It was now a symbol, a reckoning, a moment when the system was forced to look itself in the mirror, and a hero, once shackled and shamed, stood tall again. Because someone with power remembered who he really was. And in that courtroom, that day, justice began to turn. Then it happened. Right in the middle of a courtroom filled with tension, judgment, and silence. The kind of silence that presses down on your shoulders. General Thomas Bradford came to a full stop. He stood just inches from Sergeant Marcus Jennings, who was still sitting in handcuffs. His prison green jumpsuit contrasted starkly against the general's spotless dress blues, adorned with 4 stars, shining medals, and decades of hard-earned honor. The two men couldn't have looked more different. One accused, the other decorated. One seated, the other towering. But in that moment, they were equals in the eyes of something far greater than the courtroom. Everyone held their breath. The judge froze mid-motion. The clerk stopped typing. Even the cameras hesitated, as if unsure they were witnessing something too sacred to film. And then, it happened. With steady, deliberate motion, General Bradford raised his right hand and saluted. Not a quick, casual salute. A full, formal, razor-sharp salute, the kind reserved for true heroes. The kind that only comes from one warrior to another. And he held it, unwavering. The room gasped. One woman near the back audibly said, "Oh my God." You could hear the clicks of cameras trying to capture the moment, unsure if it was even real, because everyone knew what it meant. You don't salute someone in custody. Not in uniform, not in a courtroom, not when they're the one on trial. Unless you're making a statement, unless you know something the rest of the world hasn't figured out yet. Jennings looked up, shocked. His spine straightened. His eyes locked on the general's, not with fear, but with a mix of disbelief and pride that had been buried under weeks of humiliation. The chains around his wrists clinked as he slowly stood. He couldn't return the salute, not with his hands bound, but he didn't need to. His eyes did all the speaking, and the general knew it. After several long seconds, General Bradford lowered his hand and broke the silence with a voice that carried not just across the courtroom, but across the lives of every veteran who had ever felt forgotten. "Sergeant Jennings," he said, voice steady but full of emotion. "You served this nation with honor and courage. You upheld the values of the United States Marine Corps with every breath, every bullet, every step you took into harm's way." He paused, glancing briefly at the judge, then back at Jennings. "What has happened to you is a disgrace." That word, disgrace, hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. It wasn't just an opinion. It was a declaration. The judge blinked, clearly caught off guard. The prosecution fidgeted nervously. Even the defense attorney seemed stunned into silence. Nobody had expected this. Nobody could have, but the general wasn't done. He turned fully to the judge's bench and spoke clearly, powerfully, not with arrogance, but with authority born from decades of leadership and sacrifice. "Your Honor, I am not here today simply as a commanding officer. I'm not here to challenge your authority or interfere with the law. I am here as a man who has led brave soldiers into battle, a man who has written letters to grieving mothers, a man who has seen firsthand what true courage looks like, and what injustice feels like." His voice didn't waver. "I am here today to apologize, not just to Sergeant Jennings, but to the very idea of justice, to the system that allowed a man who bled for his country to be shackled without due cause, to the society that honors heroes in commercials but forgets them when the cameras are off." He looked directly at the prosecution table now. Because, somewhere along the way, someone decided Jennings didn't look like a hero. Someone saw his skin before his service, his street before his medals, and they made a decision that could have destroyed everything he's fought for. You could hear sniffles in the crowd. A woman wiped away a tear. A young man clutched his phone, live-streaming the moment with trembling hands. The judge, clearly moved, tried to maintain control. "General Bradford, this is highly irregular." But Bradford gently raised a hand, respectfully. "I understand, Your Honor. I'll say no more. But I hope that when you look at Sergeant Jennings, you see more than a file, or a uniform, or an accusation. I hope you see a man who has already stood trial for us all, on foreign soil, in the dark, under fire, and he didn't flinch. He turned back to Jennings one last time. You didn't fail the system, son. The system failed you, but you held your ground, and that's what makes you a Marine." With that, General Bradford stepped back. Slowly he walked to the gallery and took a seat, not as a witness, but as a reminder that sometimes the highest-ranking person in the room isn't the one wearing the robe. Sometimes it's the one in handcuffs, and from that moment on, the trial would never be the same. What the public didn't know, what no one outside a tight circle of insiders had realized, was that Sergeant Marcus Jennings had been set up from the very beginning. The courtroom had just witnessed a moment of powerful defiance, a 4-star general saluting a handcuffed Marine. But what followed would shake the very foundations of the justice system and expose a betrayal that ran deeper than anyone expected. The truth behind the accusation. The officer who accused Jennings of assault? It wasn't random. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was personal. Rewind the clock to Jennings's final deployment in Afghanistan. He was part of a classified mission involving a covert unit that operated in one of the most dangerous regions of the country. It was there that Jennings witnessed something no Marine should ever see from his own team: illegal activity, extortion, abuse of power. And the man responsible? Lieutenant Craig Harmon, the same officer now sitting quietly in the courtroom pretending to be a victim. Jennings did what few have the courage to do in the military. He filed a report against his superior. He didn't do it to be a hero. He didn't do it for glory. He did it because his moral compass was unshakable. His report led to an investigation. That investigation led to Harmon's quiet removal from the unit. No headlines, no public reprimand. Just a man stripped of privilege behind closed doors. But Harmon didn't forget. and he sure as hell didn't forgive. Fast forward to Jennings's return to civilian life. He was rebuilding, reconnecting with his community, mentoring young men, and trying to adjust to a world that didn't know the weight of war. That's when it happened. One late evening outside his home, police showed up and arrested him. The charge? Assaulting a fellow officer. Harmon. It didn't make sense. There was no motive, no real evidence. But still, they put him in cuffs. Still, they dragged him into court like a criminal. Still, the system was prepared to believe the worst before asking a single question. And for a while, it almost worked. A general's testimony. And a case. Unravels, but once General Thomas Bradford stepped into that courtroom and made his stand, the dam broke. The courtroom had already seen something extraordinary, a salute, an apology, and a demand for justice. But what came next was a slow, undeniable collapse of the prosecution's case. The general's testimony did more than shift public opinion. It unlocked evidence that had been intentionally buried. First came the surveillance footage, a video taken by a neighbor's doorbell camera. The footage, time-stamped and clear, showed the exact moment Harmon claimed the assault took place. But instead of throwing punches, Jennings was shown diffusing a conflict between two neighbors outside a shared property line. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't violent. He was calm, collected, trying to prevent something worse from happening. And Harmon? He wasn't even on camera until minutes later, when he arrived on the scene yelling and pointing fingers. That footage had been submitted weeks earlier to local police, but it was never mentioned, never logged, intentionally ignored. Next came the witnesses, people who had been afraid to speak, worried about retaliation, worried about losing jobs or being pulled into legal messes, but now emboldened by the general's appearance. One by one, they came forward. A neighbor, a retired sergeant, who knew both men. Even a former member of Harmon's old unit. Each testimony painted the same picture. Jennings had been set up. Harmon had manipulated the system to ruin the man who ended his career. The moment of freedom, with overwhelming evidence mounting, the judge had no choice. She looked directly at Jennings, who sat with the same quiet dignity he had shown from day one, wrists still bound, expression calm, as if even now he was prepared for the worst. But this time, the system chose right. "Remove the handcuffs," the judge said firmly. Immediately. The courtroom erupted into gasps. The bailiff moved quickly, keys rattling as he unlocked the chains binding Jennings's wrists. Click. The sound of the cuffs falling away wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. It was the sound of a man reclaiming his name, his honor, his life. "All charges against Sergeant Jennings," the judge continued, "are hereby dismissed. This case is closed." No applause. Just silence, respectful, weighty silence, the kind you hear after something sacred takes place. Jennings rubbed his wrists gently, then looked around. Not in triumph, not in anger, just relief. Finally, the truth had spoken louder than the lie, a deeper wound. Exposed, but as Jennings stepped out of the defendant's seat, now a free man, everyone knew the story wasn't over. Because something deeper had been exposed, something far more unsettling than just one bad officer or one bad arrest. This was a system that could turn on its own heroes, a system that allowed evidence to be buried, that gave more weight to power than principle. That saw skin before service, assumption before investigation. It was a chilling reminder. Even the most decorated warrior could be brought low by lies, if the truth stayed hidden. As Jennings left the courtroom, flanked by supporters, veterans, and reporters, one question echoed in everyone's mind. How many more have been silenced before their truth could be heard? And that's when Jennings turned to the cameras, finally speaking for himself. "I don't want revenge. I want reform. I want a system that treats every man and woman, in uniform or not, with the fairness they deserve." Today wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. And with that, he walked into the light. no longer just a soldier, but a symbol of resilience. After the ruling, after the handcuffs were removed, and the weight of a false accusation was lifted, General Thomas Bradford didn't rush out of the courtroom like other officials might have. He didn't return to his seat. He didn't call a press conference. Instead, he walked, slowly, purposefully, back over to Sergeant Marcus Jennings, now standing tall, no longer restrained. Their eyes met again, but this time it was not in shared pain. It was in mutual respect, and then the general reached into a small black case and pulled out something folded with military precision, a folded American flag. The courtroom, packed with press, supporters, and officials, fell silent once more. Hitai placed the flag into Jennings' hands and looked him square in the eye. "You never stop defending your country," the general said quietly, but firmly, "even when it didn't defend you." Those words, caught on camera, spread like wildfire. Within hours, the clip was trending across YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and major news outlets. Justice for Jennings surged on social media. Comment sections overflowed with tears, rage, and support. It didn't matter if people were civilians, veterans, or active duty. They all saw it the same way. A man had been betrayed. And now, finally, he had been seen. The visual of that folded flag being placed into Jennings's hands became an image of redemption. It reminded the nation, and the world, that heroes don't stop being heroes just because the system fails them. And dignity, when restored, is more powerful than any medal. Jennings speaks out. In the days that followed, reporters flocked to Jennings' home. Networks begged for exclusive interviews. He eventually agreed to speak, but not with anger or vengeance. He sat in a simple chair on a quiet porch, the flag resting beside him. "I wasn't angry," Jennings said softly, staring past the cameras. "I was just disappointed. I love my country. I always have. I just wanted it to love me back." That line, "I just wanted it to love me back," would echo in podcasts, articles, morning shows, and military forums across the nation, because it wasn't just about Marcus Jennings anymore. It was about every service member who'd come home to confusion instead of celebration. Every veteran who'd been questioned, profiled, overlooked, or cast aside. Every black soldier who had to prove they belonged not just on the battlefield, but in their own neighborhoods. Jennings had become a voice, a symbol, a mirror. America had to look into, from pain to purpose. But Jennings didn't stop at a viral video or a trending hashtag. He knew this wasn't the end of his journey. It was the beginning of a mission. Within months, he launched a non-profit organization called Shield and Honor, aimed at helping veterans who had been wrongfully accused, profiled, or misunderstood. By the legal system, he partnered with lawyers, mental health professionals, and former military leaders, including General Bradford, to create a support network for those lost in the gray zones of justice. He helped fund investigations, provide legal aid, and advocate for legislative reform. But more than that, he offered something rare and powerful: understanding. Because Jennings had been there. He knew the feeling of betrayal. He knew what it was like to serve with honor and be met with suspicion. And he made it his mission to ensure no other veteran would have to stand in court alone, wondering if anyone believed in them. "Wearing a uniform doesn't make you immune to injustice," he told a group of young Marines during a speaking engagement. "But it should always mean you're respected. And if the system forgets that, we'll be there to remind it. A changed nation." His work didn't go unnoticed. Jennings was honored at the Pentagon. He was featured on 60 Minutes, The Daily Show, and even received a humanitarian award from a National Veterans Council. But more importantly, he inspired change. In the wake of his trial, local police departments and military courts across the country began revisiting old cases involving veterans. Some departments created task forces to look into racial bias in veteran arrests. Others opened new channels for military personnel to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. something Jennings never had when he first blew the whistle overseas. Laws didn't change overnight. Systems don't reform in a day, but one thing was clear. Sergeant Marcus Jennings had started something. He had taken the worst moment of his life, a moment meant to destroy him, and turned it into a force for good. The lasting image today. If you walk into the modest headquarters of Shield and Honor, there's no marble lobby, no corporate sheen, just a room filled with case files, framed service photos, and a wall covered in handwritten letters from veterans across the country. And, in the center, that same folded American flag, the one General Bradford gave him, the one that now symbolizes not just patriotism, but perseverance, and beneath it, engraved on a plaque, are the words Jennings now lives by. They tried to break me. Instead, they reminded me why I stand. Because in the end, Jennings wasn't just defending his country on foreign soil. He defended it right here, in courtrooms, in conversations, in quiet moments when the world wasn't watching. And when it finally did, it watched a soldier become a symbol. Sometimes it takes a salute to say what words can't. And sometimes, justice doesn't wear a robe. It wears 4 stars. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful true stories that matter.